The smoke from Hermann Schultz's cigarette curled upward in the briefing room somewhere in northern Italy. Spring of 1944 had brought something unexpected to the war-torn skies of Europe. The German ace pilot, with 47 kills painted on his Messerschmitt's fuselage, looked at the intelligence report in his hands and started laughing. Other Luftwaffe pilots turned their heads toward him. "What is so funny, Hermann?" asked his wingman, Klaus Berger. Schultz waved the paper in the air like it was a joke. "The Americans have sent a new fighter squadron to escort their bombers. They paint their tails red, bright red, like children playing war games." The room filled with curious murmurs. Another pilot, Franz Müller, leaned forward. "Red tails? Why would they do such a stupid thing? They want us to see them from far away." Schultz's smile grew wider, but there was something cruel in it. "That is not the interesting part, my friends. These pilots are Negroes, Black American pilots. The Americans are so desperate, they are sending children and Negroes to fight a man's war." Laughter erupted across the briefing room. These were experienced combat pilots who had fought over the deserts of Africa, the forests of Russia, and now the skies of Europe. They had seen the worst of war. The idea that America would send untested black pilots against them seemed like a gift. "Easy victories for everyone," Klaus said, raising his coffee cup like a toast. "Maybe I will finally catch up to your kill count, Hermann." Their commander, Major Wilhelm Adler, entered the room and the laughter died down. He was old for a fighter pilot, nearly 40, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death. He looked at the intelligence reports spread across the table. "Do not underestimate any enemy," Adler said quietly. "The Americans do not send pilots across the ocean for fun." But Schultz waved his hand dismissively. "With respect, Major, we have fought the best British pilots, the tough Russians, the brave French. These are American beginners who probably never even saw combat training." Adler said nothing more. He had learned that young pilots needed to learn some lessons themselves. 300 miles away, at an American airbase near the Italian coast, Captain Jake Morrison walked slowly around his P-51 Mustang fighter plane. The morning sun painted the red tail in bright crimson. He ran his hand along the smooth metal surface. The name George's Fury was painted below the cockpit in white letters. Jake came from a small town in Georgia where he had faced hatred and discrimination his whole life. He remembered the signs that said, "Whites only," and the sidewalks he had to step off when white people walked past. He remembered the anger in people's eyes when he dared to dream of becoming a pilot. But he had made it through the brutal training at Tuskegee, Alabama, where Negro pilots were trained away from white pilots. The training had been harder, longer, and more demanding than regular pilot training. They had to be twice as good to get half the respect. His wingman, Lieutenant Marcus Washington, approached from the other side of the plane. Everyone called him Doc because he had been a high school teacher before the war. Doc was tall and thin, with glasses that made him look more like a professor than a fighter pilot. But Jake had seen him fly. Doc could calculate angles and deflection shots in his head faster than most pilots could guess. "You ready for this, Jake?" Doc asked, adjusting his flight gloves. "Been ready my whole life," Jake replied. "Just another day of proving we belong in the sky." Their squadron commander, Major Robert Hayes, climbed onto a wooden platform near the runway. 24 pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group gathered around him. All of them were Black Americans. All of them wore the same uniform as every other American pilot. But they all knew they carried an extra weight on their shoulders. "Gentlemen," Hayes began, his voice strong and clear. "Today we escort B-17 bombers deep into Germany. Intelligence says the Luftwaffe will defend heavily. They always do when we target their industrial cities. Our job is simple: protect those bombers. Every single one comes home. The Germans are experienced. They are skilled. They will test us. But we have trained for this moment." Hayes paused and looked at each pilot's face. "I know what people say about us. I know the other squadrons doubt us. I know our own bomber crews are nervous flying with Negro escorts. But today, we show them who we are. Not with words, with actions. Any questions? Silence. Then let's fly." 24 engines roared to life. The sound was like thunder rolling across the airfield. Jake strapped himself into his cockpit, checking every instrument twice. The P-51 Mustang was the best fighter plane America had built. Fast, agile, with long range and 6 powerful machine guns. In the right hands, it was deadly. The squadron took off in perfect formation, climbing into the clear morning sky. Below them, Italy spread out like a painting. Above them, endless blue. Ahead of them, Germany and the mission that would change everything to T-15,000 feet. They met the bomber formation. 50B, 17 flying fortresses, flying in tight combat boxes for mutual protection. Each bomber carried 10 men and tons of explosives meant to destroy German war factories. The bomber crews looked down at the escort fighters with their distinctive red tails. Some of the white bomber crews felt uneasy. They had heard rumors that Negro pilots were not skilled enough for combat. Jake's radio crackled to life. Red Tail Leader, this is Big Friend 6. We see you. Thanks for the escort. Copy that, Big Friend 6. We got you covered. All the way there and back. The formation flew northeast toward Germany. Time passed slowly. Jake scanned the sky constantly. His eyes never stopped moving. Doc flew 500 feet to his right, also searching. Then Doc's voice came through the radio, calm but urgent. Bandits. High and right. 11 o'clock position. Count 8. No, 12 contacts. Jake's heart rate increased, but his hand stayed steady on the controls. This was it. The moment they had trained for. The moment they would prove themselves. He spotted them now. Dark shapes diving down from the sun. German fighters. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. They were coming fast. Red tails, this is leader. Stay with the bombers. Defensive positions. Show them what we got. High above, in his diving Messerschmitt, Hermann Schultz saw the red tails clearly. He smiled. His finger moved to the trigger. Soon he would have 48 kills painted on his plane. Maybe 49. These would be easy. The two forces rushed toward each other at combined speeds of over 600 miles per hour. The sky was about to become a battlefield, and nothing would ever be the same again. Jake Morrison's voice came over the radio one last time before the chaos began. Remember Tuskegee. Remember everyone who said we couldn't. Now show them we can. The German fighters screamed downward. The red tails broke formation with perfect precision, and the battle for respect began in the deadly skies over Europe. The first bullets tore through the air where Jake Morrison's plane had been just a second before. He pulled hard on the stick, feeling the G-forces push him down into his seat. His P-51 Mustang climbed vertically while Hermann Schultz's Messerschmitt Bf 109 shot past him, the German unable to follow the sudden maneuver. In aerial combat, everything happened fast. A pilot had maybe 2 or 3 seconds to make a decision. The wrong choice meant death. The right choice meant survival. There was no time to think, only to react from training and instinct. Doc, 2 on your 6. Jake shouted into his radio. Marcus Washington rolled his plane hard to the left, and the 2 German fighters overshot him. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 was a powerful plane, but in the hands of an overconfident pilot, it was just another target. Doc leveled out behind them and fired a short burst. His bullets walked across the wing of the second German plane. Smoke erupted from the engine. The Focke-Wulf spun downward, the pilot bailing out over the Italian countryside. The bomber crews watched in amazement. The Red Tails were not just surviving. They were winning. Schultz pulled his Messerschmitt around in a tight turn, trying to get back into the fight. Were these pilots trained? How were they this good? The intelligence reports said these were beginners. But the Negro pilot in the red-tailed Mustang flew like he had been born in a cockpit. Jake saw Schultz turning and dove toward him. The 2 planes rushed at each other head-on, both pilots firing. This was called a chicken run, and most pilots avoided it. Both planes had 6 machine guns firing hundreds of bullets per second. Whoever turned away first lost position. Whoever stayed on course longest won. Or both died. At the last possible second, Schultz broke left. Jake shot through the space where the German had been, rolling his plane to stay on target. Now he was on Schultz's tail, exactly where a fighter pilot wanted to be. Got you. Jake whispered. He squeezed the trigger. Tracers streaked across the sky. But Schultz was experienced. He threw his plane into violent maneuvers, diving and climbing, spinning and rolling. Jake stayed with him through every move. The two aircraft danced through the sky in a deadly ballet. Down below, the bomber formation continued toward the target. Other Red Tail pilots fought off German attackers with skill that shocked everyone. Lieutenant Tommy Ross, the youngest pilot in the squadron at just 19, sent a Messerschmitt spinning away with its tail section shot off. Captain James "Thunder" Brown worked with his wingman to trap a German between them, giving the enemy no escape. Klaus Berger found himself in a turning fight with a red-tailed Mustang. He was a good pilot with 23 kills. But the Negro pilot he fought was better. After 3 complete circles, Klaus realized he was losing the turn rate. The American plane was getting closer to his tail with each rotation. "I need help. I need help," Klaus shouted into his radio. But everyone was busy fighting for their own lives. The Red Tail pilot, it was Doc Washington, led his shots perfectly, firing where Klaus's plane would be instead of where it was. The bullets hit the Messerschmitt's engine. Oil sprayed across Klaus's windscreen. His engine temperature shot up. He had maybe 30 seconds before the engine seized completely or caught fire. Klaus did the only thing he could. He rolled inverted and bailed out. His parachute opened at 8,000 feet. From high above, he watched the battle continue. The Americans with their red tails were destroying his squadron. Jake's plane shuddered as Schultz's bullets finally found their mark. Not a direct hit, but close enough that shrapnel from explosive rounds peppered his right wing. Warning lights flashed on his instrument panel. But the P-51 was a tough plane, built to take damage. Schultz expected the American to break off. That's what most pilots did when damaged. But Jake Morrison had not come all this way, had not faced all that discrimination and hatred, had not proven himself at Tuskegee just to run from a fight he was winning. Jake adjusted his aim and fired again. This time his bullets walked right up the fuselage of Schultz's Messerschmitt. The German's canopy shattered. His left aileron tore off. Hydraulic fluid streamed behind his plane like blood. Schultz knew he was beaten. If he stayed, he would die. His pride wanted him to fight, but his survival instinct was stronger. He pushed his damaged plane into a dive and ran for home. Behind him, Jake Morrison could have followed and finished him. But Jake had his orders: protect the bombers. Personal glory meant nothing. The mission meant everything. Red tails sound off. Major Hayes called over the radio point one by one. The pilots reported in. All 24 planes were still flying. Some had damage. All had fired their guns. But every single Red Tail pilot was alive and heading home with a bomber formation. The bomber crews could not believe it. In their past missions with white fighter escorts, they had sometimes lost 2 or 3 bombers to German fighters. Today, with the Red Tails protecting them, every single bomber made it to the target, dropped their bombs, and was heading home safely. Red Tail leader, this is Big Friend 6. The bomber commander's voice came through. There was something different in his tone now. Respect. We owe you boys our lives. You just saved 50 crews. Major Hayes keyed his radio. Just doing our job, Big Friend. Just like any other American pilots. But everyone knew it was more than that. They had proven something that should never have needed proving. Courage and skill had nothing to do with skin color. The formation flew back across Italy as the sun began to set. Behind them, German airfields were in chaos. Schultz landed his damaged Messerschmitt with emergency crews rushing to meet him. He climbed out slowly, looking at the destroyed left side of his plane. His hands were shaking slightly, though he tried to hide it. Major Wilhelm Adler walked up to him. The older officer looked at the damage and then at Schultz's face. "So," Adler said quietly, "how were those easy victories?" Schultz said nothing. His count was still 47 kills. Not 48. Not 49. The same number as this morning. But his confidence was gone. Klaus Berger walked up later after being picked up by German troops. His uniform was dirty from landing in a field. His pride was even more damaged than his clothes. They were incredible, Klaus admitted. I have never fought pilots like that. Where did America hide such skill? Schultz finally spoke. The intelligence reports were wrong. These are not beginners. These are not inferior pilots. These are warriors. He paused and looked at his damaged plane again. And they just embarrassed the entire Luftwaffe. Word spread quickly through German air bases across Italy and southern Europe. A new threat had arrived in the sky. The Americans with the red tails. And they were deadly. Back at the American air base, the red tails landed one by one. Ground crews counted the bullet holes in several planes. They counted the empty shell casings from the machine guns. Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Sarah Chun gathered the mission reports. Her tally showed 11 German planes confirmed destroyed. 11 more probably damaged. 0 American losses. Jake Morrison climbed out of his cockpit slowly. His legs were stiff from the tension of combat. His hands finally stopped gripping phantom controls. Doc Washington walked over, and they shook hands without saying anything. Some things did not need words. Major Hayes gathered the squadron. Today you proved what I already knew. You're the finest pilots in the sky. Tomorrow, we do it again. And the day after that. Until this war is won and everyone knows what I know. That night, Jake lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling. He thought about Schultz, the German pilot who had tried to kill him. In another life, maybe they could have been friends. Both loved flying. Both were skilled. But war made enemies of people who might have been brothers. That he also thought about the bomber crews they had saved. 50 planes. 500 men who would go home to their families because the Red Tails had done their job. That mattered more than any personal glory. Outside, the stars filled the sky. The same stars that both American and German pilots used to navigate. The same sky that did not care about race or nation or prejudice. In the sky, only skill mattered. And today, the Red Tails had proven they had plenty of that. 2 weeks had passed since that first battle over Italy. The Red Tails had flown 15 more missions. Every single bomber they escorted came home safely. Not one bomber lost to German fighters. Not one. In a war where bomber crews expected to die on their 10th mission, this record was nothing short of miraculous. The word spread through every American airbase in Europe. Bomber crews started requesting the Red Tails specifically. Give us those boys with the red tails, they said. They bring everyone home. But in Germany, anger was growing. Hermann Schultz sat in a planning room with maps spread across a large table. His 47 kills seemed meaningless now. Every time he flew against the Red Tails, he came back with nothing. Other German aces were having the same problem. They are making fools of us, said Franz Mueller, slamming his fist on the table. High Command is asking questions. Why can't we stop one American squadron? Schultz studied the maps showing bomber routes. His mind was working on a problem like a chess player, thinking many moves ahead. Because we fight them the same way we fight everyone else. Head-on attacks. Individual combat. But these pilots work together perfectly. They never leave the bombers. Never. Major Wilhelm Adler entered the room. Behind him came 3 other squadron commanders. Adler's face was serious. Berlin has given us authorization. Schultz, you will command a special formation. Pick the best pilots from 3 squadrons. Your only job is to destroy the red-tailed fighters. Do whatever is necessary. Schultz felt his competitive nature rise. What about the bombers? Other squadrons will handle the bombers. You focus only on the red tails. Show them they are not invincible. For 3 days, Schultz planned his trap. He studied reports of every red tail mission. He learned their formations, their tactics, their tendencies. He noticed they always kept some fighters high above the bombers, watching for attacks from above. They always kept fighters on the flanks. And they never, ever chased German fighters away from the bomber formation. That is their strength, Schultz explained to his chosen pilots. But it is also their weakness. They are prisoners to the bombers. They cannot maneuver freely. So we attack from multiple directions at once. Split their attention. Force them to choose between protecting different bomber groups. Intelligence reported that a massive bomber formation was planned for early June. Over 100 B-17s would strike deep into Germany to hit aircraft factories. The Red Tails would escort them, and Schultz would be waiting with 72 German fighters. 3 squadrons, all experienced pilots, all angry about being beaten by the Americans. Jake Morrison sensed something was wrong even before they took off. Intelligence officer Sarah Chun had shown him reports of increased German fighter activity. More experienced pilots were being pulled from other fronts and sent to Italy. "They are planning something," Sarah said, pointing to the patterns on her charts. "Too many good pilots gathering in one area. They know our routes somehow." Major Hayes called the squadron together. His face showed the weight of command. "Today might be the hardest fight we face. Intelligence says the Germans are waiting for us. They want revenge. They want to prove we got lucky before. So we're going to show them that luck had nothing to do with it." 24 red tails took off into a cloudy morning sky. Behind them, over 100 bombers lifted off from multiple airfields, gathering into a massive formation. This strike would hurt German war production significantly if successful, but only if the bombers made it through. The formation flew north, climbing to 25,000 feet. At this height, the air was thin and cold. Pilots breathed pure oxygen through their masks. Below them, the world looked small and distant. Up here, only the war mattered. They crossed into Germany. The bomber crews tensed at their guns. The red-tail pilots scanned the sky constantly, eyes never resting. The minutes dragged by like hours. Then Doc Washington's voice crackled through the radio. "Bandits. Multiple groups. High right, high left, level at 12 o'clock. Count 30, no, 40. They are everywhere." Jake's heart hammered, but his voice stayed calm. "Red tails, this is leader. They want us to panic. They want us to break formation. We stay with the bombers. Tight formation. Watch your wingmen. Do your jobs." The German fighters came from 3 directions at once, exactly as Schultz had planned. It was a brilliant tactical move. The red tails had to split up to cover all the threats. For the first time, they were outnumbered 3-1. "Major Hayes, we cannot cover everyone." Tommy Ross shouted. The young pilot's voice showed his fear. "Yes, we can." Hayes replied, "We trained for this. Trust your training. Trust each other." The sky exploded into chaos. Planes dove and climbed and turned in a 3-dimensional battle that stretched across miles of sky. Machine gun tracers drew lines through the air like deadly fireworks. Engines screamed. Radios crackled with shouts and warnings. Jake found himself fighting 2 Messerschmitts at once. He used a maneuver called a scissors, turning hard one way while his wingmen turned the other way. The German planes split up to follow them, breaking their advantage. Jake shot down one. His wingman damaged the other enough to make it flee. But everywhere he looked, his squadron was under pressure. Too many Germans. Not enough red tails. Doc Washington was protecting 3 bombers that had fallen behind the main formation. 5 German fighters swarmed him like wolves around a wounded deer. Doc flew the most brilliant defensive flying of his life. He spun and rolled, always keeping his plane between the Germans and the bombers. He shot down 2 attackers, but bullets finally found his plane. His left engine caught fire. Smoke poured from his wing. "Doc, get out of there!" Jake screamed into the radio. "Negative," Doc replied, his voice strained. "These bombers need me. Every second I hold them is 1 second closer to safety." Jake broke away from his own fight and dove toward Doc's position. He shot down 1 German in a nearly vertical dive. But there were too many. A Focke-Wulf pilot named Heinrich Vogel got behind Doc's damaged plane. Vogel's bullets tore through the cockpit that Doc's plane began to spiral downward, trailing fire and smoke. At the last moment, the canopy flew off and a parachute blossomed. Doc had survived, but his war was over. Jake felt rage like he had never known. But he forced it down. Rage got pilots killed. He needed to be cold and precise. He needed to be perfect. For the next 20 minutes, Jake Morrison flew the best mission of his life. He shot down 3 German fighters. He damaged 5 more. He saved 2 bomber formations from certain destruction. The other red tail pilots followed his example. Tommy Ross overcame his fear and downed his first enemy plane. Captain James "Thunder" Brown saved an entire bomber group by taking on 6 German fighters alone. Schultz watched in frustrated disbelief. His plan was perfect. His pilots were the best Germany had. They outnumbered the enemy 3-1. Yet the red tails were still fighting, still protecting the bombers. It seemed impossible, but he was watching it happen. Finally, after burning through most of their ammunition, the German squadrons had to break off. They limped back to their bases, counting their losses. 16 German planes shot down. 16 experienced pilots dead or captured. All for what? The bombers still made it through. The Red Tails had still won. The American formation flew home in battered but victorious condition. 2 bombers had been shot down by anti-aircraft fire over the target. But not a single bomber had been lost to German fighters. The Red Tails' perfect record remained intact. Jake landed his bullet-riddled plane on fumes. He had maybe 2 minutes of fuel left. When he climbed out, his legs almost gave out. He had been in the air for 4 hours, most of it in combat. His hands cramped from gripping the controls too hard. His face showed the imprint of his oxygen mask. Major Hayes found him sitting on the wing of his plane, staring at the ground. "Doc made it," Hayes said quietly. Radio report says he was picked up by Allied ground forces. "He is hurt bad, but he will live. They're sending him home." Jake nodded, but could not speak. He had lost his best friend, his wingman. They had trained together at Tuskegee. They had flown every mission together. And now Doc was gone. That night, the squadron gathered to count the cost of victory. 16 confirmed German kills. Captain James "Thunder" Brown was missing, his plane shot down. Doc Washington was going home with injuries that would end his combat career. 5 other planes were so damaged they could not fly again, but they had protected the bombers. Every single one that the Red Tails escorted made it through the German fighters. That was what mattered. That was the job. Intelligence officer Sarah Chen updated her records. The Red Tails now had 72 confirmed kills. They had flown over 30 combat missions. Their bomber protection record remained perfect. 0 losses to enemy fighters in Germany. Schultz sat alone in his quarters. He had failed. His perfect plan had failed. These Negro pilots that he had mocked weeks ago had beaten him again. He pulled out a notebook and began writing down everything he had seen them do. Their tactics, their courage, their skill. Major Adler found him hours later, still writing. "What are you doing, Hermann?" "Learning," Schultz replied. "These pilots have something to teach us. About teamwork, about sacrifice, about what it means to be warriors. I was wrong about them. We were all wrong." Adler sat down heavily. "The war is turning against us. Our best pilots are dying. We are running out of fuel, planes, and time. But yes, you are right. We were wrong about many things." The war continued. The Red Tails would fly again tomorrow. And Hermann Schultz knew he would face them again. But now he faced them with respect instead of mockery. And that made all the difference. July 1944 brought scorching heat to the airfields of Italy, but the war never stopped for weather. The Red Tails had now flown 50 combat missions. Their kill count stood at 92 confirmed German aircraft destroyed. The number seemed impossible to everyone except the men who flew those missions. They knew the price of every single victory. Jake Morrison had changed in the 3 months since his first combat. His eyes were harder now. He had killed men. He had watched friends die. He had seen more death before his 25th birthday than most people saw in a lifetime. But he still climbed into his cockpit every morning because the job was not finished. The bomber crews no longer doubted the Red Tails. Now, they trusted them with their lives. White crews from Texas, farm boys from Iowa, city kid from New York, they all wanted the pilots with the Red Tails watching their backs. In the air, bullets and flak did not care about skin color. Only skill and courage mattered. Hermann Schultz had become obsessed with understanding the Red Tails. His notebook was now filled with over 50 pages of observations. How they communicated, how they positioned their planes, how they anticipated attacks before they happened. His kill count had grown to 53, but none of those victories came when facing the Red Tails. He had also stopped believing the propaganda his government fed him about inferior races. How could he believe that when the finest pilots he had ever fought were the ones his leaders called inferior? The lie was obvious now. It made him wonder what other lies he had believed that on a morning that started like any other, Schultz's Messerschmitt developed engine problems during a routine patrol. The timing gear in his Daimler-Benz engine cracked, causing his plane to shake violently. He managed to land at a small emergency field in Switzerland, the neutral country between Germany and Allied territory. 2 hours later, a damaged B-17 bomber also made an emergency landing at the same field. The bomber's number 2 engine was shot out, number 3 was failing, and the pilot had no choice. As the bomber rolled to a stop, Swiss soldiers quickly surrounded both aircraft. By international law, both crews were interned until the war ended. Then a third plane appeared in the sky, trailing smoke. It was a P-51 Mustang with red tails. Jake Morrison's plane had taken heavy flak damage over Austria. His engine was dying. The Swiss field was his only chance. Jake landed hard, his damaged landing gear barely holding. Swiss soldiers ran toward his plane as he climbed out slowly, his flight suit torn and bloody from shrapnel wounds. He was carrying his sidearm, which the Swiss immediately confiscated. 3 enemies. 1 neutral field, all waiting to see what would happen next. The Swiss commander, Captain Franz Weber, gathered all the pilots in a secured building. You are all interned under international law. You will be treated well, but you cannot leave. Tomorrow, arrangements will be made to return you to your respective forces. They sat in a large room with armed guards watching. The B-17 crew, 10 men who had barely survived their mission. Hermann Schultz, alone in his leather flight jacket with his Knight's Cross medal. And Jake Morrison, wounded but alert, watching the German pilot who had tried to kill him so many times. For hours, they sat in uncomfortable silence. The bomber crew whispered among themselves. Schultz pretended to read a book the Swiss had given him. Jake stared out the window at the mountains, thinking about Doc Washington, who was now recovering in an American hospital. This evening came. One of the bomber crew, a young navigator named Peter Riley from Alabama, began to speak. I flew 30 missions. I thought I would die on every single one. But the red tails were there. Every time. They saved us so many times I lost count. His crewmates nodded. The pilot, Major Carl Henderson, looked directly at Jake. We were wrong about you boys. We requested you specifically for our last 10 missions. Best decision we ever made. Jake said nothing. What could he say? These men were learning something they should have known all along. Prejudice was stupidity. But Jake was too tired to be angry anymore. Schultz had been listening. Finally, he spoke in accented but good English. You are Captain Jake Morrison. I have fought you many times. Tail number 473. The plane you called George's Fury. Jake turned to look at him. And you are Hermann Schultz. 53 kills. Knight's Cross. The pilot who almost shot me down over Anzio. Almost, Schultz said with a slight smile. But not quite. You're very skilled. All of your squadron is. I wrote reports telling my commanders that you're the best pilots in the sky. They did not want to hear this truth. The bomber crews looked surprised. A German ace was praising Negro pilots? That went against everything they had been taught to believe. Why do you tell them this? Jake asked. Schultz was quiet for a long moment. Because it is true. Because I was wrong when I first heard about you. I laughed. I thought you would be easy victories. But you have taught me something important. Courage has no color. Skill has no race. A man is measured by his actions, not his skin. The Swiss guards brought food. They ate in continued silence. But something had changed in the room. Respect had replaced hostility. The next morning, Swiss officials arrived to arrange releases. The bomber crew would go to Allied territory. Schultz would return to Germany. Jake would rejoin his squadron. They would all return to trying to kill each other. Before they left, Schultz approached Jake. When we meet in the sky again, I will try to shoot you down. This is war, but I want you to know you have my respect. You are warriors. Jake shook his hand. And you have mine. May we both survive this war. They never saw each other face to face again. But both men remembered that meeting in Switzerland where enemies became something more than enemies, even if just for one day. Jake returned to his squadron 3 days later. His wounds were treated and healing. Major Hayes briefed him on the mission he had missed. The Red Tails had escorted bombers to Munich and shot down 8 more German fighters. Their count was now at 100 confirmed kills, 100 victories. Not one bomber lost to enemy fighters in their entire combat history. The number seemed impossible, but the Red Tails had made the impossible routine. August brought the biggest mission yet. The target was Berlin, the heart of Nazi Germany. Over 300 bombers would strike the German capital. The Red Tails were assigned to lead escort duty. This would be the deepest penetration into German territory yet. It would also be the most heavily defended. Intelligence officer Sarah Chun showed Jake the mission briefing. Every fighter Germany has left will be up there. They cannot let Berlin be bombed without response. This will be bad. They're all bad, Jake replied. But we will do our job. We always do. The Red Tails took off before dawn. 24P, 51 Mustangs with red tails, carrying long-range fuel tanks for the extended mission. Behind them, waves of bombers filled the sky like a metal thunderstorm. The flight to Berlin took over 4 hours. They flew high, where the air was thin and cold. The pilots breathed pure oxygen and scanned the sky constantly. Every pilot knew this mission would determine everything. If they could protect bombers all the way to Berlin and back, their legend would be complete. Hermann Schultz stood in a briefing room in Berlin. Major Adler was assigning pilots to defensive sectors. "They're sending the Red Tails," Adler said. "The Americans want their best pilots protecting this raid. Show them that Germany still has teeth. Show them we can still defend our homeland." Schultz suited up slowly, checking his parachute twice. He had a feeling about this mission. A bad feeling. The war was clearly lost. Everyone knew it, even if no one said it out loud. Germany had lost the Battle of Britain, lost North Africa, lost Stalingrad. Now the Allies were pushing into France. How long could Germany hold? But orders were orders, and Berlin was home. He would defend it with everything he had. The two forces rushed toward each other across the skies of Germany. 300 bombers, 200 American escort fighters, including the 24 Red Tails, and nearly 100 German fighters, everything Germany could put in the air on short notice. Jake saw Berlin in the distance. Smoke already rose from previous bombing raids. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky with black clouds of exploding shells. And coming straight at them, the German fighters. Red Tails, this is leader. Berlin at 12 o'clock. Bandits high and level. This is what we trained for. This is our moment. Protect those bombers. No matter what. The battle for Berlin had begun. And by the time the sun set, everyone would know that the Red Tails had earned every bit of their legendary reputation. The battle over Berlin was like nothing Jake Morrison had ever experienced. The sky was filled with so many aircraft that collision became as deadly a threat as bullets. Tracers streaked in every direction. Parachutes blossomed as pilots from both sides bailed from burning planes. The roar of hundreds of engines drowned out even the anti-aircraft explosions. Jake stayed focused on his sector, protecting a bomber group on the left flank. But he could see the entire massive formation. Red Tails were scattered across miles of sky, each pilot fighting multiple enemies at once. Tommy Ross, now a veteran at 20 years old, was in a turning fight with two Messerschmitts. Captain Thunder Brown, who had miraculously survived being shot down weeks ago and returned to duty, was diving on a German fighter that was lining up on a damaged bomber. Hermann Schultz climbed above the chaos, trying to find an opening. His wingman, a young pilot named Kurt Wagner on his first mission over Berlin, stayed close. Schultz had told Kurt to watch and learn. "Do not be a hero," Schultz had said. "Stay alive. That is the only victory that matters now." But Kurt saw a red-tailed Mustang below them and got excited. "I have one. I am attacking." "No, wait," Schultz shouted into his radio. But Kurt was already diving, making every mistake a beginner could make. He focused completely on his target, forgetting to check his own tail, forgetting that red-tail pilots never flew alone. Tommy Ross saw the diving Messerschmitt and immediately positioned himself perfectly. When Kurt pulled out of his dive, Tommy was already there. One burst, 2 seconds of firing. Kurt's plane exploded in a fireball. The young pilot never had a chance to eject. Schultz watched his wingman die and felt rage and grief mixed together. How many more young men had to die in this war? How many on both sides? But emotions could not exist in combat. He pushed his feelings down and focused on the mission that he spotted Jake Morrison's red-tailed Mustang protecting a bomber that had lost 2 engines. The bomber was falling behind the formation, struggling to maintain altitude. Jake was alone with it, the rest of his flight busy elsewhere. This was Schultz's opportunity to heat dough from the sun, the oldest attack tactic in aviation. Jake saw him at the last second and broke hard left. The two planes that had fought each other so many times before were at it again. But this time was different. Both pilots knew this might be their last battle. The war was ending. Germany was losing. This final confrontation felt personal. They fought across the sky over Berlin. Schultz tried every trick he knew. Jake countered every move. They climbed until their engines struggled in the thin air. They dove until the ground rushed up to meet them. They turned until both pilots were on the edge of blacking out from G-force's 15 minutes of continuous combat. The longest dogfight Jake had ever experienced. Both pilots were exhausted, their planes low on fuel and ammunition. Neither could gain advantage. Finally, Jake saw his opening. Schultz made one small mistake, banking slightly too steeply in a turn. His plane hung in the air for just half a second. That was enough. Jake pulled lead, aimed carefully, and put his finger on the trigger he could end it. Right now, Hermann Schultz, the ace with 53 kills, would become kill number 54. Jake's squadron would be legends. The Red Tails would have over 100 confirmed victories. His finger tightened on the trigger. But he did not pull it all the way. Instead, he adjusted his aim and fired a burst that tore into Schultz's left wing, damaging the control surfaces but not destroying the plane. The Messerschmitt rolled violently, but Schultz recovered control. Jake's radio crackled. It was on the German frequency somehow, cross signals in all the chaos. He heard Schultz's voice, speaking in German, but the tone was clear. Confusion. Why? Jake switched to the German frequency and spoke in English. Go home, Schultz. The war is over. You know it. I know it. We do not have to kill each other today. There was long silence. Then Schultz replied in English. You are giving me mercy? I'm giving you what you gave me in Switzerland. Respect. Now go, before I change my mind. Schultz's damaged Messerschmitt turned east toward Berlin. Jake watched him go, knowing he might have just made a mistake that would get him court-martialed. You did not let enemy aces escape. But Jake had seen enough death. If he could end this day with one less widow, one less orphan, then it was worth the risk. The bomber formation completed its mission and turned for home. Incredibly, despite the massive German defense, only 2 bombers were lost to fighters. 2 out of over 300. The Red Tails had done it again. Their perfect record remained intact as they flew back across Germany. Jake counted his squadron. 22 planes. 2 were missing. Lieutenant Eddie Hayes, Major Hayes's younger brother, had been shot down. He had been seen parachuting safely, but would be a prisoner of war. And Captain Samuel Brooks, one of the original Tuskegee pilots, was gone. No one had seen what happened to his plane. The survivors landed as the sun set. Ground crews counted over 400 bullet holes across all the Red Tail planes. Every single aircraft had been hit multiple times, but they had flown, fought, and brought their bombers home. Intelligence officer Sarah Chin met Jake as he climbed from his cockpit. 16 confirmed kills today. That brings your squadron total to 112. She paused. Jake, you had perfect position on that German ace. Multiple pilots reported it. Why did you not shoot him down? Jake was quiet for a long time. Because the war is ending, Sarah, and I'm tired of killing. I saw mercy as the braver choice. 2 weeks later, Germany surrendered. World War II in Europe was over. The Red Tails had flown over 15,000 total sorties, destroyed 112 enemy aircraft, and maintained their perfect record. Not one bomber lost to enemy fighters while under their protection. Not one. The squadron returned to America as heroes. They were given medals and honors. But when they stepped off the planes in Virginia, they had to use the colored bathroom at the train station. In North Carolina, they could not eat at the same restaurants as white soldiers. The country they had fought to protect still saw them as second-class citizens. Jake Morrison received the Distinguished Flying Cross. Tommy Ross stood beside him, having finished the war with 9 kills. Major Robert Hayes gave a speech about what they had accomplished and what they had proved. But the pain of coming home to discrimination was almost worse than facing German fighters. Years passed. Jake left the military and became a commercial pilot, one of the first black pilots hired by a major airline. He married, had children, and tried to leave the war behind, but he never could entirely forget. He kept a photograph of his squadron in his office. 24 young men, all dead now or old like him. They had been the best. In 1952, Jake received a letter from Germany. The envelope was thin, the paper old. Inside was a handwritten note in careful English. Captain Morrison, you do not know if I survived the war. I did. I'm writing to tell you what I could not say over the radio that day over Berlin. You showed me mercy when you had every right to kill me. You proved that true courage is knowing when not to pull the trigger. My son is alive today because of your decision. I named him Jacob, after you. I have told him stories of the finest pilots I ever faced. The Red Tails taught me that a man's worth is measured by his character, not his color. I was wrong to mock you. The world was wrong about many things. Thank you for showing me the truth. I hope we both found peace after the war. Your friend and former enemy, Hermann Schultz. Jake read the letter 3 times. Then he put it in a frame on his wall next to the photograph of his squadron. 2 warriors who had tried to kill each other had instead taught each other about respect, mercy, and what it truly meant to be human. The Red Tails had proved their worth in the sky. They had shown that courage knew no color. And in doing so, they had helped change a country and a world that desperately needed changing. Their legacy would inspire generations of pilots, black and white, who came after them. The sky had never cared what color they were. It only cared how bravely they flew. And the Red Tails had flown with more bravery than anyone had imagined possible.